Here's what we'll be working on today. It's the first exercise in the weight painting. I'm going to treat this like a little bit of a finger, and I want to show you the steps on or many different ways of actually doing this. And I'd like you to practice all of the things that I'm going to show you. And I am going to go a little bit overboard because some of the things I'm going to show you is going to be very handy in different circumstances. So let's jump back to our starting file. All right, we're starting from the start file here. The first thing that we're going to do is jump into pose mode and create some animation on our deformation bones here, because that way we can see our deformation in action. Now I'm only going to key the rotation because this is a very simple model, but it's always a good idea to key it in rotating in one direction, rotating in the other, translation in one direction, twist it, as well as scaling it. Even if your model doesn't need to do that, because seeing it like this can actually really help get you those smooth transitions that you want. Okay. Having said all that, I'm just going to do the easy approach and do rotation. So I'm going to keyframe our rotations on frame 1. So I'm going to hit I and keyframe rotation. Actually, let's turn on our screencast keys. And then I'm going to go 10 frames later and key this one here. So R90 enter, and then make sure that I key that. I'm just going to hover and press I. Also keyframe that guy, bone 3, and go 10 frames later. And whoops, rotate this guy down 90 degrees and keyframe that. Now we should have our animation that goes like that. Right, that's our animation done. But as I said, when you're doing a more complicated model, rotate it one way, rotate it the other, twist it, translate it, scale it, and do that all on all your bones. And that's going to get you really good results. The next thing we're going to do is jump into weight paint mode. Now, because I have the lock object modes disabled and I left that armature in pose mode, I can just jump straight into weight paint mode and then select my bones here, and that will select the groups. I also need to turn on my wireframe. There's many different ways of doing that. I'm just going to turn it on over here. There we go. We can see where we're going to paint, and we are going to just use our add brush. So this is our draw tool. We're using the add brush, and I want to choose a weight of 1 and a strength of 1, and I want to take it up so that there's this is all 1, and then it's going to blend out. So there's going to be a smooth transition here. And before I even make my first stroke, I'll show you that I'm using auto normalize. Although when I make this first stroke, it's going to go 100% red all the way up there. That's okay. It's going to fix when I paint this bone. Let's paint this guy here and smooth it out. That's probably a little bit too far on the top there. There's a couple of different ways that you can change the size of your brush. You can use F, or you can just zoom in and then your brush becomes comparatively smaller. So there we go. Let's just take that a little bit further. Oops, I'll fix it with a blur brush later. And let's paint this last one here. And that's gone a little bit too far, so I'll paint it a little bit back. Now I can do that forward and back because of that auto normalize. Now let's scrub this and see my animation. So it's not very good here. How's the other side looking? Okay, it's a little bit better. So to fix this section, I would choose either one of these bones and go to the midpoint and then start to blur it out. So let's actually start with this guy here. Make my brush a little bit bigger and choose the blur brush there. And that's actually a little bit too big. But let's just start to blur that there to create a smooth transition. That's looking pretty good. Now this one, I'm going to do the same thing. Whoops, didn't mean to move my view there. And I'm going to zoom in so my brush doesn't go too big. Just kind of make that a little bit smoother. So there we go. That is a pretty good job there. And for this exercise, that would be good enough. But I want to take it further and show you how to get more precision, because when things are more complicated than this, then you need to know some different tools. So I'm going to jump into edit mode and edit the vertices individually and paste my work over to some other vertices. And when I did that, you can see that all my verts are back where they started. So we just jump over to the modifier, and with this button here, if we enable this one, you can see our deformed mesh, although our vertices are left in the pre-deformed position. So we can enable this button, and that's going to move our vertices as well. So now they are in the deformed location. Oh, and also one thing that I should point out is that I have the preserve volume turned on. It's always a good idea to check what it looks like with and without, because one's always going to look better. Okay, so let's jump into wireframe mode so we can see through. And can you see we're looking dead on, and these loops are not straight like these ones here. So I'm going to fix this all up. I'm going to start with my midpoint here. Do I want to start with my midpoint? Actually, no, I don't. I'm going to start with this one here. So I'm just going to select the loop with Alt clicking there. And then I want to make the active vert this one here, because it's going to be easier to see from the bending point here. Now, I want to copy all of the weights from that active vert to the selected verts. So I'm going to, over in my item tab, I've got my vertex weights here. I'm going to go copy, and that's straightened them all up. But you notice that there's a bit too much intersection going on. And this is the bit that actually requires a little bit of practice, but I can adjust my weights here. And so I'm going to adjust one of these verts, but I'm imagining what effect that's going to have on the whole entire loop. And I moved it this way, so this is going to move up a little bit. But after I've made that change, I'll make sure that I hit normalize, and then I copy those normalized weights across. You see that now we're still nice and straight, and we've shifted it more in the direction that we want. Okay, let's do our middle loop here. So I'm selecting our middle loop with Alt click, and then I want to grab the vert that's on the middle here, and I'm just going to start with it at the 50-50 point, normalize that so it goes 50-50, and then copy that. So now we're dead straight, and I'm just going to adjust it slightly so that it's going to move a little bit in that direction. So you notice now that it's not a dead 50-50. If I hit copy, it's moved that up and keeping it dead straight. And I'm going to do one last loop here. I'll grab the bottom vert here and adjust that. So let's copy everything across. Let's straighten it up and let's adjust it. So I'm going to lower this one down just slightly, normalize, and then copy again. And let's just do that again. I want to get a little bit smoother. There we go. We're going to scrub our animation to see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to do two more things. I'm going to straighten up this one by adding a tiny little bit of influence from bone 2 to it, and then do the opposite here. So I'm going to add a tiny little bit of influence on bone 1, because you can see it is 100% following along with bone 1. All right, so this actually doesn't have that weight group on it. So I'm going to select bone 1, go down here, and then assign 0 weights to all those there. So this is for the more advanced users. So don't worry if you don't follow this along now. When you get more experience, this will make sense. You'll be like, aha, I know what Wayne did all those years ago. So I'm going to add a little bit of influence, just a tiny little bit. And actually that's my active vert, but that's okay. Normalize that, copy it across. So now you'll see that they bend slightly, and I've smoothed out that transition there. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here, but I'm going to make this one active. And this already has that bone group, so I don't need to add it. Copy that. Let's actually see. Now, yeah, that's good. See, these verts are moving slightly. That's what I wanted, just a tiny little bit of influence. So there we go, that's what we want. Now you're probably thinking, what about all this intersection here? Doesn't that look bad? Well, not for a finger, no, because that's actually where we want it to intersect. So that's okay. For a different type of tube, yeah, we probably wouldn't want it to intersect, but for this type of model, that is perfectly fine. I'll probably just speed this up, but I'm going to do exactly the same thing to our vertices down here. And that is my final result. So there we go. Hopefully you have as much fun as I did when you recreate this one. Now remember, the final step there of editing the vertices and being really precise is a pretty advanced thing. So if you struggle with that, don't worry too much. Just practice with the brushes first. But I know some of you will be like, that is very handy for certain circumstances in the tricky spots. Just to be able to adjust those verts precisely in certain circumstances is invaluable. All right, so in the next part of the video, let's go through a whole bunch of tips for you. All right, so our first tip, if things are getting in the way when you're trying to weight paint, don't forget that you can actually just jump into edit mode and hide some vertices. So I'm just going to select some verts here with lasso select and just hide them. Then when I jump into weight paint mode and enable some of the masking, all those vertices are now hidden. Now, if you move your rig and you find some part of your mesh is sticking behind like this, that is because these vertices aren't weighted to anything at all, so they're stuck behind. Let's just jump into edit mode to have a look. If we select these ones here, have a look in the item tab, you can see that there's no vertex group data. Whereas if we select these ones, you can see it is a member of the vertex group. So for these ones, you just need to make sure that you assign all the vertices to at least one bone control. This one should be part of our main group here. Let's assign that, and we fixed it. Now, when you're weight painting, it's really easy to create a lot of messy data. Now, by that, I mean all the vertex groups are pretty all over the shop. Here you can see we've got a whole bunch of empty groups and they're not needed. And actually, let's just select here. So let's go select. You can see that each one of our verts is part of this group, and it shouldn't be. So in weight paint mode, there's actually a function to clean that up. So I just jump back over into weight paint mode, and in our weights menu up here, we've got this function called clean. And when we enable this, we need to just also open up our redo panel here. We've got some options. We can either run it on the active group, the selected pose bones, or all the deform pose bones, or all the groups. So I'm going to run it on all of our deform groups, and then we can actually set a limit. So anything below this number will actually just get wiped from that group. So we want a number close to 0, so just go 0.001. And this option here, it will always make sure it keeps it part of a single group. So that way you won't have any of your mesh left behind if it just happened to be slightly weighted like this. So that should fix that issue. So if we jump back into edit mode and select this, you can see that we've cleaned it all up. We don't have any of these 0 weights anymore. And actually, if we select these, actually, I'll show you. So if I select that, you can see that it's only pertaining to the verts that are actually part of that group. So that's something that you can do. Just make sure that you don't have a threshold too high and you actually wipe out some weights that you needed. And one more note on this, it doesn't actually normalize it when it runs that function. So after you've run that, make sure that you run the normalize function again on your deform pose groups and disable the lock active. That should re-normalize all your deforming groups. Now there's 2 more things I want to give you an overview on, and that is in the cases where you can't actually get the deformation that you want, you just can't paint it quite good enough. What do you actually do? Well, there's actually 2 things that you can try. One of them is by using another modifier called the smooth corrective modifier. And this will do its best to smooth out those areas. And if you place it after the armature modifier, it's going to smooth it out. And don't forget, you can actually just run this on a vertex group. So if you don't want to smooth the whole entire thing and just a certain area, just add those vertices to a group and enable it there. One more thing with this one, if you happen to be using a subsurf and it is below the subdivision surface, you'll notice that you get an error. And that is because the rest source, where it's getting its information from, is using the original coordinates, and this subsurf actually changes the amount of vertices. So a way to avoid that is to either run it above the subsurf, or if you do need to run it behind the subsurf, just make sure that you go to the frame that is not deformed, and then you change the rest position to bind coordinates, and then click bind, and that will take the information from the position that the mesh is in at the moment towards those bind coordinates that you gave it. And now the last final thing I want to show you is when all else fails, you can actually use a corrective blend shape. Now this is just for the advanced users, and I only want to plant this seed for now. I'll do a proper tutorial in the future. But how do we do a corrective shape key? Well, first of all, we add a shape key. So we go click, click, and this is going to be our corrective shape key. I'm just going to type core for now. I'm going to ramp that up to 1 and then jump into edit mode to edit these verts. So what if I wanted this to kind of look like that? Well, that is my corrective blend shape. The first thing I need to do is actually model it, and then I can fire this with a driver. As I said, I'll save this for a future tutorial, but you could drive that based on the rotational difference between these 2 bones here, or the input channel. So when this bone activates -90 on the z-axis, then you can fire this one here. So I just want to plant that seed because I know that's going to be enough information for some of you to figure out the rest on your own. And that's part of what rigging is all about.